All right, welcome everybody to Real Hawk Talk. We're back for episode 7. It's a rare Monday night where me, Jeff Simmons, and my co-host Brian Nemhauser are taping again. There's a lot of stuff to discuss this week. We got the Seahawks continue their marvelous preseason play again. Another blowout victory. They're 3-0. We're getting close to the roster cut down. They're going to go from 90 to 53 on Saturday. And we got a very special guest this week, so there's a ton to dive into. But before we get into the show, I just want to say this episode, like all Real Hot Talk episodes, is brought to you by Steam Donkey Brewing. It's the great beer, but Brian's been showing it off the last couple of weeks and tormenting me. If you're ever down in Aberdeen, you should decently check it out, steamdonkeybrewery.com. And they've been great to us so far, so we're happy to team up with them. And yeah, we've got a ton to dive into tonight. Brian's here. It's Monday at 6:30 Pacific time. And yeah, Brian, I guess your thought, let's get into the KC game right away. That was another fun game where you saw the offense for pretty much a full half, played a bit into the third quarter. You saw a lot of the defense, and they keep looking faster and deeper than any other team they're going against. And they're not going against slouches. These teams are playoff teams. They're good rosters. And the Seahawks just look better from top down than all these teams. So what were your thoughts on the game? And I guess, how does your view of the 53-man roster change after the majority of those preseason games are done?
I thought that once again, the team looked familiar. It looked like the type of confident, dominant team that we loved in 2012, 2013, 2014, where I always kind of wrote about manifest destiny with that tein. It was like I know you're Canadian. This is an American thing, American bravado and ego. But, back in the day, there's this concept that, settlers, came in and decided that the rest of the U.S. territory was theirs for the taking, and didn't always do nice things to take it. But the Seahawks always gave me that impression during that time frame. And, it was like you always knew they were going to win, and they fully expected to win, and their opponents almost expected them to win. You just didn't know how. And I think that we're starting to get back to that same groove in a way that, as optimistically as I could put it, I didn't think it felt that way in 2015 or 2016. And so, people are picking at a lot of stuff on Twitter. Hey, their run defense looked porous. Their first string defense, third game in a row, they let an opening drive down the field. People picking on this and that. I'm like, we'll get into it a little bit later, but you look at the preseason stats. This is the number 1 offense in yardage, the number 1 offense in passing yards, the number 2 offense in rushing yards, the number 4 defense in points allowed. It's just preseason, but and by the way, they're the number 4 defense, I believe, in rushing yards allowed. So, there's not a lot of nits to pick, to be honest. So I think we're getting to a situation where the question is not about, how good is this team, or are they ready? The question is really, who's going to be left off this roster? Who is the Jay Howard? Who is the Clinton McDonald that may have some value that the team might want to flip before this weekend? I think that's where my mind is based on what I saw on Friday.
Yeah, and it's not just the eye test that you really see this. I dug up some of these numbers, and I mentioned in one of our earlier shows, but when you look at those 3 seasons you mentioned, 2012, 2013, and 2014, their point differential in the preseason was significantly different than the last 2 seasons. And a lot of time you'll say preseason records don't matter. The opponents aren't scheming for you, and that is true. However, there's a lot to be taken away from just the depth they have, and we mentioned it. I mentioned it all throughout the offseason. The depth of the roster just looked so much better than it had the last couple of years. And now it wasn't just talk. You look at running back, you look at receiver, and the big area to me that kind of caught me off guard is the defensive line. And we're going to dig into this definitely as we go through this 53-man roster. They're almost too deep everywhere at the defensive line and the offensive line. And you can really learn a lot by a team in the preseason based on the line of scrimmage. And that's where you really saw how poor Seattle was set up, especially last season on the offensive line. Once their starters were barely functional. Once the starters came out, they couldn't function at all. These guys in the second string, with Matt Tobin looked fine on the offensive line. Ethan Posick looked really good as a second line center. Michael Roos. They are top down, are really, really set up well. So I guess we want to dive more into the nitty gritty of the game. And this has been a topic on Twitter that there's been some polarizing takes. You kind of inferred to it earlier. Reese Odiombo, to me, I went through the game live. I watched the TV copy, and then I kind of dug into a second copy after the game to see if my mind was tricking me. And outside of the one or two plays that Pete Carroll even indicated today that he graded poorly on, Reese looked really solid to me. And there was a lot of people tweeting out that one mistake. And I know our buddy Ben Baldwin, who tweets out great clips, he likes to focus on some of the mistakes that our offensive linemen make. And I'm not here to rag on him, but Reese Odiombo, to me, looked very functional. And you saw signs of it. I know you mentioned this last week in the Minnesota game. And I really liked what I saw, especially from a pass protection standpoint. And I think a lot of the freaking out and is the team doomed without George Fant seems to be a bit overstated. Where are you on Reese right now?
Yeah, well, Jeff, I've been pretty consistent on this one. Last week, we were talking about this when we had Danny on the show, and my take has been, look, I hate to repeat myself for people that have been listening, but I saw George Fant as a 2 or a 3 out of 10 at left tackle last year. The Seahawks survived. I thought he improved, but I thought he did remarkably well given what he had to work with in terms of experience. And I think that he improved this year, and I think he was set to be maybe a 5 or a 6. I think people were talking about him like he was a 7 or an 8 out of 10.
Yeah,
it's not the case. I mean, especially like the team was super excited, and the team's super excited because guess what? They value run blocking the most, and he put on 20 pounds. So they were like, oh, now he can, really push the line of scrimmage. And that's true. He was going to be much improved in run blocking. His pass protection was still a significant issue. I've seen him get beat plenty of times in practice. Not saying he's a bad player, and I'm not saying we're better off without him, because we definitely aren't. But, if you really think that he's a 5 or a 6 out of 10, I'm looking at this and saying, Reese Odiombo, I said, I'm hoping that he can be a 3 or a 4. I think he can be better than what Fant was last year. Fant had never played left tackle. He was brand new from basketball. He's experience-wise as low as you can get. Odiombo was a left tackle in college. He was highly thought of. Normally when the Seahawks draft a lineman, everyone scratches their head and says, why did they take him? Or at least they say, why did they take him there? Mm-hmm. When the Seahawks drafted Odiombo in the 3rd round, which is a pretty high pick, universally, scouts, analysts, all had positive things to say about Odiombo. The biggest question mark was his durability, because he had fought through some injuries. So,
sure,
it seemed to make sense to me that he could get in there and at least hold his own. And what I'd seen of him, I'd seen some spurts. He's not very consistent in his play, and I think that'll frustrate some people. But guess what? Neither was Fant. So what I saw, I watched him almost exclusively to the point where I forgot about Jermaine Ifedi, who we should come back to.
Yeah.
And I also forgot about Matt Tobin, even, who came in later. And I just was focused on Odiombo. And look, I think he was a mess in the run game. I don't think he was very good there. And I think that probably frustrates the Seahawks for no end. But I thought his pass protection was really solid. And the one mistake he had, they've already said, was clearly an assignment mistake. He thought he was supposed to kick out and block a linebacker. He was supposed to be blocking the end, and the end got a free path to the quarterback. So that doesn't mean he's of no fault, but those are not mistakes that can't be corrected. So I was thrilled with what I saw. And if you saw the way the offense functioned, you got to be excited about the potential there. I agree with your assessment. I thought he did really well.
Yeah, and I might even go a little higher than a 3 or 4, because how important pass protection really is. I know the coaches like run blocking more, but seeing Russell with pockets is just a refreshing sight. And I know Justin Houston, Kansas City's best pass rusher, didn't play, so there's a little bit of a caveat. However, if they can get just okay pass protection, and it looks like Odiombo can bring that, that makes a huge difference for these guys, because last year their left tackle, I don't even know if I'd go a 2 or a 3. They might go a 0. And they were that bad. But I want to stick to something you were talking about. and shift the conversation over a little bit. You mentioned the run game, and I can't find myself more confused with this running back situation. Not in a bad way. They seem absolutely loaded at the position. And I've been on record, and a lot of people have disagreed with me on this. I think Eddie Lacy looks a lot better than he's getting credit for. And I know you see him. He doesn't have the explosiveness on the other running backs on the roster have. But Eddie Lacy's not the kind of player you're going to learn about from 3 carries in a game. He's the kind of guy who wears on a defense over time. And you see how hard it is to tackle him. And he looked like a functional player. I know he may not be the best running back on the roster. Chris Carson is the guy I want to really talk about, because every time we see him, he seems to get better and better. And I didn't realize how good of a weapon he could be in the pass game. You saw a big pass down the field when Russell got out of the pocket. So there's him, and Thomas Rawls has looked great in camp, but hasn't been able to stay healthy. And CJ Procise, Mike Davis has been really solid. I don't know who the hell is going to start week 1. How do you see this group kind of shaking out? Because every week I find myself totally confused.
Yeah, this is this is going to be one of the more interesting decisions, and it could be the most shocking decision that comes down for the Seahawks. So let's recap for a second who's even in this conversation to begin with.
Yes,
right?
definitely.
You've got Thomas Rawls, who was the starter going into last season. You've got CJ Procise, who was a 3rd-round pick last year. The team has been incredibly high on. You've got Eddie Lacy, who the team signed to a $5 million deal. You've got Chris Carson, who's a 7th-round pick, who's, we'll talk about him more in a second. Then you've got Alex Collins. I think we can separate him out. He's not in the picture.
I don't think there's a shot.
You've got Mike Davis, who had a great camp. I think we can separate him out. He's not in the picture. And then you've got fullback, and you've got Marcel Reese, who's the veteran, and he can be a 3rd down back. He's got a lot of things going for him. And you've got Trey Madden, who is, the free agent, undrafted guy that can play running back, but also is learning how to play fullback. So let's separate out fullback for a second. And for the moment, let's assume that they keep one fullback. Doesn't matter who. Let's assume they keep one of those. So I, up until now, have been predicting that the Seahawks will keep 4 tailbacks, and it seemed pretty straightforward to me. You're going to keep Thomas Rawls, you're going to keep CJ Procise, you're going to keep Eddie Lacy, and you're going to keep Chris Carson. Simple. But where this gets difficult, Jeff, is elsewhere on the roster.
Yes.
I think there's signs that despite the lack of production, I think the team may keep Amara Darboh no matter what. If that's the case, then you're talking about a Tanner McAvoy or a J.D. McKissick or a Kason Williams, who, despite his performance, may not be safe. One of those guys
crazy
off the roster. And maybe a Jermaine Kearse, but I don't think so. I think Kearse is solid. So you look at that. You look at the offensive line room. You look at some of the defensive players. And we can get into some specifics, but you start to wonder, are they going to feel like, man, Carson is durable enough? He's good enough. We want him to get carries enough. We should move one of these running backs, see if we can find another team that needs running back.
The team they just
got stuff on tape, and get a draft pick back to create an open roster spot and go with 3 running backs and a fullback. What do you think?
I think it's not crazy at all, because I don't know how you're going to get all 4 of these guys carries. And I think the Seahawks have a clear position of strength. And if you can maximize that, especially considering they gave up a 5th-round pick for most likely a backup tackle, they're going to want maybe some of that compensation back. So off the top, Kansas City Chiefs, that's a team you can see right away. They lost Spencer Ware for the season. They have a history with some Seattle players. So maybe a Mike Davis or a Mike Davis or an Alex Collins is a logical candidate there. But just big picture-wise, I don't know how Chris Carson doesn't become the starter right now. And I don't want to be guilty of recency bias. I know every week we want to overreact to these preseason games, but Carson's training camp and preseason reminds me a lot of Russell Wilson's first year, where every week they keep giving him more and more, and they keep giving him – he's playing against the starters. In week 3, he played against Kansas City. It's kind of a weird pattern there. And he's looked better and better every time. And if he's not the starter, considering how he's been able to stay in the field, John Cullen today on the radio called him the best running back, I think, of anyone he's seen in camp. Because most of the stars don't play much in training camp. We'll give it that caveat. But if they're serious about competition, I know Darbo is a guy that we got to talk about on this too, because one of their organizational tenets is, I don't care whether you were drafted, I don't care how much we've paid you, the best players will play. And if that's the case, one, Carson should be the opening day starter. And two, Amara Darbo shouldn't be on the team. And I know you took a lot of grief for that, but everyone seems to be agreeing with you now, because whether he's on the field or it's in practice, he doesn't seem to have a standout quality. And I don't know what he's showing inside the building. And Doug Baldwin seems to really be liking his professionalism. But how do you not keep a guy like Tanner McAvoy or Casey Williams just because a guy was drafted in the 3rd round? I understand the logic of that, but that goes against basically everything they claim to stand for.
Yeah, it's true, and that's kind of what I put out. Someone asked me, how does Darbo make the team? And I said, pretty matter of fact, I mean, he has a huge 4th game of the preseason, or the team doesn't honor their core philosophy around competition. And that may sound harsh, but it's true. I mean, he has not been better than Casey Williams. He has not been better than Tanner McAvoy. He has not been better than J.D. McKissick up until this point. And he's not shown enough value even outside of receiver on special teams. And so that doesn't mean that he shouldn't be kept. It doesn't mean that he might end up being better than all of those guys. That's all possible. Mm-hmm. But if you want to be true to your core philosophy around competition, and anybody can make the roster and anyone can beat out anybody else, it just doesn't make sense to say that he's the one that's won that role. Now, I heard Pete today in his press conference, and he already is starting to lay the groundwork for, hey, it's not always going to be who does well in the games, because we see him in practice. And, and someone followed up with you talking about a guy like Darbo, and he said, yes, he's been playing well in practice. Look, both myself and other people that have been at practice can say otherwise. Now, he might have had a good day today. I wasn't there. And I think I saw a picture of him making a big catch today. Great. I'm not cheering against the guy, but I think that's a classic example of what coaches in front office start to do to prepare fan bases for, hey, we may do something that actually is not in line with our philosophy, and you should be ready for it. So, if they kept a guy like Darbo and they wanted to maybe they want to keep 7 receivers, which I think is a crazy number, but they've got a lot of value there. That's when you could do something like, traded Thomas Rawls. I think he's the only running back that has real value. You could try to trade Procise, but I think they want to keep him. A lot of people have been saying, hey, let's cut him. That's crazy.
That's nuts.
This guy's already shown Pro Bowl potential talent. He just hasn't been durable. It's his first year. You got to see that through. I don't think there's any way you let him go right now.
That's not happening.
But Thomas Rawls, I mean, this guy, maybe he can fetch a 6th round pick, maybe a 5th round that you gave up. Who knows? But if you can get anything for him, he hasn't proven he can be durable. You've got 2 other guys that can be starting quality running backs. Maybe you move on. So I think that's possible. And by the way, J.D. McKissick, who I know there's folks on the chat that are giving me crap about, he showed you part of the reason why. He looked great at running back. He's a quality receiver, and he's a kick returner. I can't keep repeating. I will keep repeating myself, but there's real value in what he can add to a roster spot for you.
And okay, let's go at this for a little bit. Let's have some fun with this. Okay, say Thomas Rawls gets traded to Kansas City. We'll ignore the compensation. Again, this is a long shot, but we're going to have some fun with this thing. Who opens the season in Green Bay, number 1? And who rounds out the depth chart? Does McKissick make it? Does Mike Davis? We're not considering Alex Collins here. He's pretty much off the team. But all right, go through your depth chart running back, assuming that this scenario unfolds.
That's a great question. And you and Danny Kelly are you're a little out in front of me in terms of where Carson is in that depth chart. Yeah, I absolutely think that he has the most potential of anybody on that roster as a starter. And if you had a great 5-point grading system around durability, pass blocking, running, catching, Did I say durability already? That would be the fifth. So,
Yeah.
In any event, I think he's the highest, across not in every category, but in terms of a total value there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I can definitely see him becoming a featured back. It seems really early to start that way. I think Eddie Lacy is your opening day guy. I pause because, they've said Thomas Rawls is the starter. They've gotten increasingly quiet about him the last couple of weeks when he hasn't been able to play. It wouldn't shock me if he was there, if he was the starter, and I wouldn't be upset about it. But
no, that's very realistic.
But let's just play this along for a second. Let's say that he gets moved. I think it's Eddie Lacy. I think it's CJ Procise in third downs, and I think it's Chris Carson getting the rotation reps with Lacy.
Yeah.
And then you've got a fullback, and I think you do have McKissick on the roster as an additional backup if you need it.
Yeah.
So again, that's a lot of running back back there.
Man, that's moving on from Rawls and then Mike Davis in that scenario too.
Yep.
They're loaded.
Yep.
It's crazy. Okay, so let's shift a little bit to the other side of the ball now before hopefully our guest jumps on. But Naz Jones opens up the game with the first teamers, and he replaces Jaron Reed, who's by all indications had a very good camp. And number 2, Jeremy Lane starts out in base defense. Shaq Griffin comes in nickel, moves outside lane, moves inside. Was this a scenario where you see them just testing things out, or is this kind of what you should expect in Green Bay?
Yeah, I wish I could say otherwise. So there's what I would want them to do, and then there's what
I want to hear what you want them to do. That's more important.
Well, I think it's both, right? I want them to start Shaq Griffin outside. I went all in on him last week. I don't feel any differently. I know people are like, hey, he just got beat by Tyreek Hill down the field. Yep, guess what? That's going to happen to more than just Shaq Griffin. But I think this is a guy they've got to invest in. They got to get him on the field, and they will be I don't want to compare it to Russell Wilson in the sense that he's going to be, an MVP candidate like Russell Wilson, but it's the same kind of scenario of he is a rookie, put him out there, and you'll be rewarded by midseason by the development that you will see by doing that. That's what we saw with Russell Wilson. They protected him a lot early. By the end of the season, he was tearing the league apart. So I'd like them to do that with Shaq Griffin. I don't think that's what they're going to do. What I think they're building up toward, it seems to me, is Jeremy Lane would be the starter outside. And then I wouldn't be surprised if Tremaine Brock is the guy that becomes the third corner to start with in Green Bay. Wow. And either Lane or Brock move inside. That seems like the more conventional decision to make. I think they're letting Brock kind of get his feet back under him after being out for a little while. And I wouldn't hate that. But I just think that Shaq Griffin is the most talented corner on the roster outside of Richard Sherman, and the Seahawks are better with him on the field.
It's part of what we were saying before. Their organizational philosophy in so many areas has been what Pete learned at USC and what John did in Green Bay. Let's go with the young guy. Let's go with the guy who's got the more upside. We'll develop. We'll deal with the pain at first. And I think I'm with you on that. I think if that's kind of how they've built this team into the powerhouse roster they were, and going against that for a short-term solution seems very short-sighted and kind of against how they've built so many areas of the roster. And realistically, the team's going to be a nickel a ton anyway. So they're going to be more of a 3-cornerback team, and they're not going to play, I guess, Terrence Garvin or Will Hoyt all that often. So I think that third cornerback really does become a big question, because if Griffin's not on their top 3 cornerbacks, I think they're making a mistake personally, and I think it'll be a short-sighted one because you want to give Griffin this time. I know Richard Sherman took a couple injuries until midseason to get in, and maybe they're going to follow that model, but I think I would roll with Griffin, and even though he's playing Aaron Rodgers in the first week and some other tough quarterbacks early, I want to see him, and I think the best way for him to develop is playing time. And
no doubt. And I think one of the more interesting things going on there, Jeff, is further down that depth chart, right? So we talked about the running back situation, and hopefully, when our guest joins, I'll be able to ask him as well on this. But when they signed Tremaine Brock, I think it created some roster flexibility in that cornerback room. And I've been previously predicting, I've flip-flopped on this a little bit, but I've had Tedrick Thompson not making the roster. I have them keeping 4 safeties and 6 cornerbacks. Well, based on what I've seen recently and just reading the tea leaves a little bit, I'm flipping back. I've got Thompson making the roster. I've heard, this is basically reading between the lines with Pete Carroll and how he talked about Tedrick Thompson and his future with the team and his special teams contributions.
Yeah.
And DeAndre Elliott missed this game due to injury.
That was a big one.
It was. I think Pierre Desir has played well, and he was in there. But I don't know that Elliott or Desir have done enough to knock Thompson out, 4th-round pick that they invested in. So now I've got 5 corners on the team, and both DeAndre Elliott and Pierre Desir not making it. That's a tough one to swallow. There's a chance that, again, that Rawls roster spot, if they choose to use it, they don't have to use it on offense. They could choose to carry an extra corner if that's where they want to carry an extra player. But that's going to be tough. And we haven't even gotten to defensive line, which maybe even tougher.
Later. So, the next couple minutes, I kind of want to just get into just a couple of my quick thoughts from the game. I'm going through some of my notes and have you comment on them. And I want to double back on this and really get to this 53-man roster. And later in the show, I want to sit down and really dig into this. And we're going to go through areas they have some flexibility. But just a couple of quick thoughts before we move on a little bit here. I'm going through my notes, and first thing I had was Russell Wilson looked incredible. And he made some throws. But there are some caveats. There are some things I was upset with Russell about, however. So just Russell was making throws from crazy angles. I saw Mike Lombardi, who works for The Ringer, the former NFL exec, compare him to Aaron Rodgers on that deep throw he made to Curse, the throw he made to Carson out of the pocket, and he was just carving. And the throw he made to Jimmy Graham down the seam that hit him right in the chest in stride, that was as good as I can remember seeing Russell look. When he has a pocket, he's a great player. And the other note I had that I don't think people talk about it enough, Richard Sherman might be the best tackling cornerback I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, man.
That hit he had last week. I know that's probably exaggeration. There's been some big hitting cornerbacks.
That was a huge hit. That was impressive.
Just every week he just has the form tackling and the technique so down pat. And I know everyone talks about his interceptions or his coverage on deep balls or his ball skills, but I don't think he gets enough credit for tackling. I know Sean Springs was a great. Oh, hold on a minute.
Hey, is that Mike?
What's up?
Hey, Mike. This is Brian Nemhauser with Hawk Blogger and Jeff Simmons.
Hello, boys. How we doing?
Oh, we're doing well. All right. We for those who don't know, we got a special guest tonight. He's joining us from his car, and it's Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network. He's one of the number one reporters at the station. He used to cover the Giants as a beat writer. He was a national reporter for Fox Sports and is now at the NFL Network. And if you guys follow him on Twitter or on TV, he's been all over the Seahawks stuff this year. And whether it's been just insight on some of their roster moves or just additional, when he was down at Seahawks camp, he had some great stuff on the air. So Mike was down in Foxborough today. So I guess we'll start with that. How was the reaction down there without Julian Edelman? And what was the vibe around that team?
I mean, there's definitely disappointment in losing Edelman because as much as they added Brandon Cooks and have the depth that you think to withstand these kinds of things, that's 98 catches that are off the board right now. And he's a tough cover, certainly when he's running horizontally. I mean, he runs a lot across the formation, across the field, and when he's got a choice route, he's really, really tough to cover. So, as Bill Belichick said, without going into great detail, there's a lot of things that are going to have to be changed as far as routes and route combinations, but the concepts of the offense should stay the same. And this is just a loss that they'll have to overcome, kind of like they did by overcoming Gronk last year. So, I know that Brady is disappointed because if he clicks with anybody best, he clicks with Julian Edelman best. And it's all about timing and location of the ball and the route and all this stuff. So, look, it's a tough one for them, but, certainly not going to be discounted as a Super Bowl contender for sure.
Yeah, Mike, you're gonna have to tell Seahawks fans twice about Julian Edelman and option routes. If there was one person that I think got overlooked or undersold for the Super Bowl performance a few years ago against the Seahawks, it was Edelman. He was a very difficult cover for that secondary and huge part of how Tom Brady was able to lead them back. So, I know they've talked about Chris Hogan and some of those other players, but it's been interesting how little they've talked about Brandon Cooks, considering what they gave up to get him.
Well, they've been talking about him up there, and maybe it hasn't registered nationally, but it will, and it will. I say that because this is a guy with dynamic speed that certainly can get down the field and make some things happen. And I guess I really didn't know the extent of his work ethic when I got there early in camp. That's what I heard from a couple of people there, and certainly Brandon talked about it, and I didn't realize he had such a great work ethic. I mean, I don't mean that to sound like, oh, the guy just gets out there and lines up and, let me just go run by somebody. I don't mean it that way, but how precise he is and down to the detail. So, again, that's the kind of thing that Brady loves. So you combine that with tremendous physical ability. And this guy is definitely going to make some plays this year, make some really big plays. I mean, he made them for New Orleans, but now you add that to this offense with some of these other threats that can hit you in so many different ways. I would fully expect that this guy is going to have a big year.
Yeah, it's all right. Let's shift back to the Seahawks for a second, since this is a Seahawks show. I remember right after the George Fant injury, which obviously offensive line is always going to be a big story around this team. You were one of the first to tweet out, and which is why you were so appealing for us to speak with, that the team was a lot higher on Odiombo than some of maybe the outside options. Do you have a sense of kind of where the team stands on him as of now? And I don't know if you got to see him the other night, but he looked pretty functional from our perspective. So maybe just
I did.
Yeah,
I did, and he looked better than when he got in the game before that. And the game before that.
Hey, Mike, you still there? I think we might be losing you.
Standpoint, you got me now?
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
From a physical standpoint, they have ability, and so now you take that guy and you throw him out at left tackle. You need the consistency, you need the toughness, you need all these things that you need from your left tackle on a playing basis. I'm sure there's going to be some inconsistency, but I do believe that when it comes to fallback options in the NFL, that Reese Odiombo bouncing out the left tackle is probably one of the better ones that a team could have.
It's interesting. You also, one of the things we've noticed, and I'm interested in your take on this, is the Seahawks seem to have some roster flexibility and more depth than they've had in past years. And specifically, we've talked about, the Tremaine Brock signing gives them some depth at cornerback and maybe makes someone like Jeremy Lane or DeAndre Elliott someone they could move if they chose to. You've got some real flexibility at the wide receiver position where they've got a bunch of guys, Paul Richardson and Curse and now Casey Williams and other guys that are coming on. And at running back, you've got this guy, Chris Carson, that just seems to be maybe the best of the bunch. And you may not need a guy like Thomas Rawls. And so I'm curious, what's your take? Do you think that it's possible the team could choose to try to move one of those guys via trade before roster cuts to try to get something back for them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you look at this roster, there are going to be guys on this roster who are potentially going to get cut that could make other people's rosters in a hurry. And there are rosters, the Cleveland Browns are still building. The New York Jets are still building. So these are the teams that are going to want to pick at the Seahawks scraps on the waiver wire. And if you're Seattle, you always hate they tried it last year with Patrick Lewis. They tried to move him to get a pick back for him. And it didn't wind up happening. I don't know if they were ever really close to something happening there, but they will try their best to make some moves as we get closer to Friday and Saturday to see what kind of value they can get. And you hit on all the positions. I mean, if I'm looking at the roster to say there are guys that potentially going to get cut that could be on other teams' rosters, I'm thinking running back. I'm thinking wide receiver. I'm thinking cornerback. It really would help them if Paul Richardson could stay healthy, or that you could bank on that. But you just can't, because he's had those. I hate to label a guy injury prone. I just look at Paul Richardson. I just don't see a lot of meat on the bones, and that doesn't necessarily mean that him tearing an ACL a couple of years ago has anything to do with that. But when he falls on his shoulder and you've got a shoulder issue there, or some of the other knick-knack stuff, you start to worry about body makeup, and you really can't count on him. But when he is healthy, boy, he's phenomenal. And if he can stay healthy, and they can buy into that, then yeah, maybe you can make a move and count on him a little bit more.
Yeah, there's we could wrap him in bubble wrap. It would be great. But I actually, someone I spoke to had actually intimated that Paul Richardson's injury in the first preseason game actually impacted what could have been some potential moves the Seahawks could have made then. And I'm curious if, the obvious is they might move people to get back draft picks or something like that and open up roster spots. Do you see the potential for them? Are there any positions you think that they could look to bolster? Maybe it's offensive line, defensive line, something like that.
Yeah, I feel like there's slim pickings on the offensive line for them. Defensive line would be interesting. I mean, they've got guys there, but they could use one more playmaker. So that would be one. I mean, depth in so many places that you're certainly looking on both sides of the trenches. If they're going to make a move, you would think that would be where it is. A lot of, and I said this at the time when Fant went down, there's not a lot of left tackle options, period. Certainly on the market. Will Beatty is probably the best among them right now, the former Giants lineman who was on their roster last year and just didn't see the field. He is working out for a couple of teams. The Jets, I think I mentioned that the other day, and I don't know if anybody's mentioned the Bengals. He did work out for them, but if Seattle was interested in him, you think they would have brought him in by now. And as for Brandon Albert, all indications are that this retirement might be a permanent thing and doesn't seem to be really that interested in playing football again. So we'll see if that winds up changing. But if you can make a move for a left tackle, a team like I said, like the Jets or maybe the Bills, these teams that seem to be trying to compile picks right now because they're not in a win mode now, those would be the teams that I'd be looking at. But just don't sense any great momentum toward a deal for a lineman right now.
Yeah, do you think that the Jets are still considering or open to a Sheldon Richardson move? That's something that we know that Seattle called about him during the offseason.
Yeah, I think Sheldon said that it was Seattle and Washington, I believe, were the two teams that he mentioned publicly.
That's right.
That he was close to being dealt for. They are still interested in dealing Sheldon Richardson. Yes, I don't know where Seattle stands on that. I would think that at the right price, they would be open to that, because that would be a playmaker like I talked about on the defensive line. But I don't have any real sense for where they are right now. I do know that if the Jets can make a move, they would make a move. I also believe that Mike Maccagnan is not just going to sell off parts to the highest bidder, basically. He wants a deal that is the right deal for him to be able to move these guys. Matt Forte is another one, the running back. Not that would be interested to the Seahawks, but he will deal Forte, but he's not just going to deal him for nothing. He would make a move to get back some serious value. And Maccagnan's a guy that is a little bit more deliberate when it comes to trades and transactions. So I wouldn't be surprised, even if he doesn't make a move on some of these veterans that he has, if it didn't last into the regular season and he kept some of these things alive. So we'll see about that.
Sticking with the defensive line here for a second, I don't know if there's any more update on Malik McDowell, because I think it's going to a contractual issue at this point. Do you have a sense of where he is right now, or is it still kind of up in the air?
I don't. I mean, what's the day I was out there? I think Pete indicated that he was not going to be playing this year. I believe if he comes back and plays at all, that'll probably be a good resolution for him. And they really have kept it tight on his injury. But I am told that it bad and probably could have been a lot worse. So this is something where I would say up in the air is probably the upside for him right now. He sustained some serious facial fractures from what I gather, and we're going to have to see what happens with him going forward. But I would not expect to see him on the field anytime soon.
All right, here's a bit of a lighter question. And with the rosters going from 90 to 53, I did the math. That's going to be 1,184 players getting released on one day. How do you function in your job in a day like that? Because I noticed when even like the Matt Tobin trade happened, you seem to have a sense on him. And I don't know how many football fans even knew who he was, at least outside of Philadelphia. How do you operate on a day like that?
Well, I mean, in some cases, you hope you fire off a text and somebody hits you back right away. So it's going to be a lot of that. And what I try not to do is, make the snap analysis or the snap judgment before I really know what's going on there. But when you have all these things flying by you, I actually go back to last year. The Eagles made the trade, the Sam Bradford trade, and everybody said, holy crap, Chase Daniel's going to start for the Eagles. And I immediately got a text that said, yeah, they're going right to Wentz. And the same person said, and Chase Daniel's not happy. So what I did was I turned around and basically relayed that and continued to move on and track some other stuff that I was tracking. And Chase was not happy with that, just because it gave the indication that he wasn't. It came off the wrong way. And he absolutely was upset with the fact that he wasn't going to start. But in my haste, I made it seem like he threw a fit and stormed out of the facility. I forget how I phrased it specifically. I went in and talked to him and said, listen, man, I didn't mean to come off that way. He's like, and he said, everybody's obviously disappointed. He goes, but I'm going to be here, do whatever I can to help Carson Wentz get ready for the season and be a good teammate. So that's the haste that comes with that cut down day when stuff's flying, where you can get a word where it's taken out of context, or maybe you didn't convey it the best possible way. So I don't know if that's the answer to your question, but it is a hectic day, and it will definitely be more hectic than it's been in years past.
Yeah, Mike, you've obviously you spent a lot of time across the NFL, and I think some Seahawks fans would be interested in your take on, as you're making your trips around, where do you think how do you think the NFC stacks up? What are your top 2 or 3 teams that you see really battling it out, and why have you liked those guys?
Well, I like Green Bay. I really were the team that I thought they were going to be late in the season last year. I mean, I was up there in camp. I spent a lot of time around the Packers last year, and as fate would have it, I haven't seen them at all this year. But I really came out of camp, thought they had a really strong rookie class. I mean, when I showed up for camp, they said, look out for this Blake Martinez guy. He's going to be our a starter and a leader pretty soon. Who knew that was going to be week 1 when he's calling the signal? So I really that's what I look for in training camp. I mean, when you go around on your trips, you can convince yourself that any team has a reasonable shot to be a contender. I mean, other than the Jets. But I'm in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and I'm looking around and I'm like, oh wow, they've got a lot of good players. Trent Baalke didn't leave them with a lot of good skill position players, but he left them with a lot of big, strong, grunt guys, and they still have that. Reuben Foster looked like he was getting off to a great start. You know what you're going to get with Solomon Thomas. Boy, if these guys can stay healthy, they could win a lot more games than people think. Yeah, but then you look around and you realize they don't have any depth because of what's happened with them the last couple of years. So that's what I kind of look for in training camp. Which teams have a lot of depth? Which teams have, like we talked about with the Seahawks, guys that are going to get cut that would probably make other teams' rosters. So I did like that with Green Bay. I continue to like that with Green Bay. I thought their additions of Jari Evans and Martellus. So I know the Seahawks expressed some regret last year about letting Jari Evans go a little bit too soon, and I believe John Snyder mentioned that publicly. So I think this guy's still got a little bit of the tank. I do think that some really good, smart additions, not just for the sake of adding them. So
I think I heard Packers in there. Who else did I miss?
I like
your other two?
No, I didn't. Yeah, I'm long-winded as I usually am.
Sorry, I was listening intently. I promise.
It's all good. The Giants. I want to be full steam ahead with the Giants. This offensive line that they have is just stopping me from doing that, and I really thought they could have even done more to help that offensive line. But they certainly do have an outstanding defense with coordinator Steve Spagnuolo doing a fantastic job last year. Things should only be better on that side of the football. So I do like the Giants. I think the Eagles got a shot. I'm expecting the Cowboys to come back a little bit. I really do. So if I'm picking the NFC East winner, I'm probably saying either Philly or the Giants, and with one of those teams having a shot to make a run. The Giants more so because of that defense. Elsewhere, I'm falling off. I did love the NFC South as a whole. I thought it was going to be 4 competitive teams. I'm probably selling a little bit on Carolina right now, and I'm fearing the fallout. The hangover for the Falcons. So I'll buy into the hype with the Bucs, and I'll say that Tampa Bay's got a real good shot of bringing everything together. I really do like what I saw down there from that team.
Yeah, they've struggled in preseason on the field, but they certainly have all the spots you want and some incredible elite talent in that roster.
And they've got if Jameis Winston can progress and cut down on the mental errors that he makes at times. I mean, they've got an offense where you just can't cover everybody. It's impossible.
So you conspicuously did not mention the Seahawks. Are you selling on the Seahawks?
No. I assume that they're in there for sure. I mean, that defense, the way that I feel like that New England game took so much out of them to win that game, and I feel like maybe if they had lost that game, things would have been a little bit different. If they had but that was such a physical, emotional game for them. And it was fantastic. I mean, it was a team that you saw could have won the Super Bowl last year if they played like that. But it's really tough to do that week in, week out, particularly if your offensive line is struggling. So if the line comes together, and I know, a lot of people around the league talk about Tom Cable, more of a run-blocking guy. If he can teach these guys to pass block a little better, this team is certainly complete in a number of other areas. And they are obviously one of my picks to be up there in the NFC this year.
I have a kind of oddball question, and hopefully you're okay for a couple more minutes. Cool. So this Colin Kaepernick story obviously continues to have a lot of people's attention in the NFL, and I'm less interested for the purposes of this conversation about all the off the field stuff. But I wonder if you think there's a chance that the Seahawks, who met with him and were somewhat serious about him, have some sort of gentleman's agreement that they're going to wait and see, and he's going to wait and see if a starting spot opens for him. And if not, if they might consider moving on from Trayvon Boykin and bringing in a guy like Colin Kaepernick as the regular season starts.
I've got no indication of that. I don't sense that that's going on with them or with anybody. And frankly, he's to the point now where if it was the right position for him to come and play with the right offer, that he would take it. So I don't sense that that's on the table at all right now. I'm shocked. I mean, I think he'd be signed by the start of training camp once we got into, late May, June. I said, okay, this isn't going to be done before the start of training camp because it would have been done by then. I did think, however, he was going to be signed by the end of training camp. So this is very surprising to me that he's still out there. And I quite frankly do not know where this is going to go for him right now. And he could be out of the league for this entire year, which is crazy to me because he certainly is one of the top 64 quarterbacks.
Yeah, I guess one of the teams
is his ability to run a system. It is surprising to me he is not signed right now.
Yeah, no one thought it would last this long for sure.
Yep.
But one of the teams you didn't mention, and it's obviously important to Seahawks fans who are listening to our show, is the Arizona Cardinals, who seem to be a game away from maybe a Super Bowl a year. a year ago, and last year fell back down to earth. They got an older quarterback, but they seem to have loaded up in the draft. What's your sense on them right now? Because they seem to be Seattle's best competition in the West.
Yeah. I mean, they are. There's a lot of unknown there, and Carson Palmer last year seemed like he was definitely starting to break down a little bit. So I'm having trouble buying in to Arizona right now. I really am. Production from guys like Robert Kindiche, I mean, that's a game changer. I'm high on teams like the Chargers, higher than others, just because I see pass rushers. So if you see this guy and if it clicks and he starts to dominate, it changes the defense. It really does in this league. So there's guys that I want to see for them come across, and they certainly have the talent in the back end of the secondary as well. So they're very much an unknown. You mentioned their draft class. You mentioned some of their younger guys. If some of their younger guys can start to step up, receivers can stay healthy. I mean, Bruce Arians talking about their receivers. Boy, that was an alarm recently, talking about how we don't have the guys to do it. And I understand he sometimes exaggerates for effect, but when I see him talking like that, I start to worry about this team and the depth as a whole.
So, Mike, last question I have for you, and I don't know if Jeff has others, but we end up having a lot of kids that follow this and often are interested in how to become you one day. They'd love to cover sports. They'd love to, be part of what's going on, even if they can't play. And I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit about how you became the national reporter you've become and what it's like to do that job.
Yeah, I mean, I was still covering for sports talk radio station in Philly, WIP, and by the time I graduated, kind of got involved writing a little bit. I covered teams for the Associated Press. I covered all four majors in college and pro. I was parlayed that into an interview with the Star Ledger in Newark to cover the Giants. And that was my first time really covering one team, being on a beat, and experience to kind of see how stories and storylines and teams develop. And the 07 season when Coughlin did a 180 and really came around and the players came around to him was one of the more eye-opening experiences for me, because I saw things when they were at their lowest, and I saw how things all of a sudden came together and how that team believed in itself. So I was around that team. I covered them for, I think, 10 or 11 years. And then I jumped into covering the national gig for USA Today. And then from there to Fox Sports. And then Fox went toward their debate format, went away from news, and NFL Network came calling at the right time. So it's been a gradual development of my role and going from local to national. So I guess the gist of it is experience as much as you can get, and never knowing where one's going to lead you. But I tell guys all the time, you got to get out there. You got to do it. You got to get in front of people. You got to meet people. You got to figure out what you want to do, what works for you, and what doesn't work for you.
Yeah, and it's amazing how many people today just go on Twitter and they come out with either a strong opinion or a take. What amazes me about you is you seem to have a unique insight on every roster in the league. How do you stay on top of 32 teams at once?
No, there's
I think Mike's going through a tunnel.
And because I don't have as it was, Jane Slater now covers them for us and does a great job. So there's really not a lot of reason for me to sometimes go down there and get in front of people. And other jobs, I didn't really get down there and try. So it happens where places and you don't get to some places, so you're not as strong. So it's what I try and do is not pretend to know what I don't know. And sometimes that's harder because in this day and age, you're expected to have, like you said, have an opinion on everything, have an insight in everything. Well, sometimes you overextend and that's when you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar. And all of a sudden you're exposed to somebody who's overextending and trying to talk about what he doesn't know. So I guess the illusion sometimes is, hey, you know what you're talking about with every team. No, that's not the case. I mean, and there's some places that I always work to get stronger. So that's all you can do. And basically say what you know and don't say what you don't know.
Hey, Mike, I just want to
Yeah.
I want to thank you for taking the time to join us tonight, and you offered some great insights, and wish you luck on the season, and hopefully we get a chance to talk to you again soon.
You got it, boys. Thanks for having me. Maybe next time I'll show my face.
Enjoy the rest of the time.
Viewers that way.
All right, guys. Enjoy.
Take care. Drive safe.
All right. That was Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network, who's clearly well-rounded about his knowledge. He seems to be high in the Seahawks. The one thing that was interesting to me with Green Bay, and we're not going to spend too much time on this, and I actually sent Brian an article because Brian had mentioned this in the past. He mentioned depth, and the one thing I noticed just following some of their writers is they actually seem very concerned about their depth, especially at offensive line, which we actually asked Danny about last week. And one of their bigger beat writers wrote an article today that Aaron Rodgers even mentioned that they're unsure who their swing tackle is going to be. They don't know who their number one backup guards are. And if they have one injury on the offensive line, they could have a domino effect that really screws them up. And they've lost some really good players. So that's definitely a team to watch, especially since Seattle opens up against them week 1, right?
Yeah. Look, here. First of all, kudos to you, Jeff, bringing another great guest on the show. I think we've got a lot more in store. You and I have been talking about it offline. I think we're going to keep pushing that along, especially now that we can mostly count on our tech to to actually work, which is nice. But we learned a lot from Mr. Garofalo there. Yeah, and I want to go back point by point through some of that stuff. I think he dropped some pretty interesting news, and it's not hard to connect the dots based off of, he was the guy that said that there was a roster tweak that could be coming. I think we can talk about what that is, and I think there's a lot of evidence that our instincts were right about that. But one of the things he talked about was the Packers. You're right, and look at their offensive line right now. It's Bakhtiari at left tackle, who is a good player, very good player. You've got Lane Taylor at left guard. You've got Corey Linsley at center. You got Jari Evans at right guard, and Bulaga at right tackle, who's currently injured. And the article you sent was really about, hey, the starters are fine. What about their depth? The depth's really not so great. Well, Jari Evans is not a spring chicken. And yes, he played all right last year, but I don't know that you can totally count on that. Lane Taylor's all right. I think he's not a sure bet, and Linsley's all right. I don't think those guys are world beaters, and they struggled running the ball last year, partially because of that line. And they've lost, a TJ Lang, and they've lost who was the guy they lost to the Bears?
Josh Sitton.
Right, Sitton. So I think that's a part of that team that people are a little too they're making too many assumptions about. And look, Bakhtiari and Bulaga have had injury issues. They have not been guys that are 16 game a year kind of guys, and doesn't take much to really cause a team to implode. So we'll see. And plus, I'm just not that high on their defense. I think Julius Peppers was a bigger part of that line, even though he's older. I think he played a pretty significant role for them. And I don't know that they've got someone who really replaces him. And so, I think there's question marks. I don't think Clay Matthews is the guy he once was. No doubt more to the Packers team, but I don't know that they're the Super Bowl, favorite that a lot of people have them as.
Well, we'll focus more on the Packers next week when we are more shifted towards week 1 of the season. I can't believe that's next week already. Crazy.
I know, right?
I know. One of the guys actually who was struggling in Green Bay was a guy who was linked to Seattle a lot in that draft where they took a Fetty, Jason Spriggs. And if we were doing this show last year, I was waving a crazy red flag. Do not draft Jason Spriggs. And he's doesn't look good at all. So I'm happy about that. But let's get back to Seahawks and that Garofalo segment we just had, because you're right. There was a ton of nuggets in there, and there were some good. So what was, I guess, your biggest takeaway from what Mike had to say?
Well, look, we knew that Mike, if we went in and asked him, hey, you said that there was maybe some roster tweaks. What are those roster tweaks? He's not going to answer that. He can't answer that. He's got sources, and they're not going to tell him information. The way this works is, if someone gives you information and you tell everybody about it and you tell everybody, specifics, you don't generally get that information next time. So he's got to be careful about how he handles that information. So, you do some sleuthing around and kind of think about what that could be. And it wasn't hard with the Seahawks. Look, there's a few places where we identified that there's roster depth: receiver, defensive line, receiver, cornerback, and running back. And he confirmed that he thinks those are places where there are some depth. He also confirmed, we asked about Sheldon Richardson. He brought that up. He also brought up, by the way, when I asked about, hey, could they make a trade before this roster finalizes? He said absolutely, that they'll probably be trying to do that. And when I, intimated, hey, what he on his own brought up some teams that could be doing that. He brought up the Jets. He brought up the Browns. We didn't mention that before. He brought those up on his own. And he then brought up that we know that Sheldon Richardson named Seattle and the Redskins. He believes that he's still available, and the Jets would try to move him. So, I put 2 and 2 together, and what I end up with is, I think that the Seahawks had real interest in making a deal for Sheldon Richardson. I think that was that is not just over the summer. I think that's relatively recent. And I think that I think that there's some potential that the Seahawks still think about making a move where they take some of their depth and maybe some draft picks and end up with somebody who that those teams don't want to carry because they're not long-term parts of their plan. And I don't think it's likely, but man, I would say that the Sheldon Richardson possibility, or at least some other moves are definitely possible heading into this weekend.
Yeah, another thing that kind of makes that even further something to think about is that Frank Clark is seeing a wrist specialist today.
That's
and
right.
We all know how valuable Frank is to the team. He had a breakout season last year, and from what I understand, the organization really thinks he can maybe become a 15-sack player. And if you lose him for an extended period of time with already Malik McDowell all likelihood done for the year, then an interior defensive lineman becomes a massive need. And I hope all the news on Frank comes back okay, because he's such an important player to what they do.
Yeah, that was a bummer to hear about in the press conference today, that he was seeing a specialist. And, that doesn't have to be a huge issue. It can just be, seeing how he can play with it, or if there's, risks for a defensive lineman are usually not game missing kind of, even if you've broken something, usually you're putting a cast on that,
a club or
people, and JPP's playing with not even his fingers. So,
yeah, true.
I don't necessarily think that that's a doomsday scenario, but you're better off as healthy as you can be, and using your hands is certainly a big part of that. So, I thought that it was also interesting hearing him talk about, what he sees in New England. When we got started, I've seen and talked to a number of folks on the Patriots side, not the Patriots team, but people that cover them. And there's been a conspicuous lack of conversation about Brandon Cooks. And, everyone said, hey, when Edelman went down, why isn't Cooks the first name that comes up? And from Mike's perspective, it sure sounded like he thinks Cooks is going to be a huge part of what they do, which is what I would have expected. So interesting to hear a little bit of a different take there.
And my takeaway is that, kind of unprompted, he brought up Paul Richardson and his durability issues. I don't know if that's a sign that maybe the team, it would have been comfortable moving him had he stayed healthy, like you kind of insinuated, or that it might not be likely they bring him back next year given all their receiver depth. But that one really jumped off the page to me, because that was unprompted, right?
That was, and I've kind of been guessing around there and talking to some folks, and we talk about Jermaine Kearse a lot, and fans talk about him a lot, and I understand why. And but Kearse has got more years on his deal, and is pretty solid. And one thing that Jermaine Kearse is durable. They always talk about the best ability in the NFL is availability, and Kearse is always available. Paul's not, and I have some reason to think that if Paul had stayed healthy and hadn't gotten hurt, he doesn't have a contract pass this year. He is young. He has got a high upside. He may have been the receiver that they were shopping around and seeing if they could get something back for. That's possible. And he got injured. He was out for a little bit. He's back now. Does that mean that maybe he's got some more value and it's not too late for them to make a move? We'll see. But yeah, I don't think there's anyone that could say you should really plan around Paul Richardson right now. He's just unfortunately been too much of a wild card. But let's hope he stays healthy and is on the team. And I think he's got a lot of promise.
Yeah. So I want to come back to our conversation about the preseason game and shift it a different way. So for those who don't know, or for those who didn't hear earlier, the Seahawks are going to go from 90 players to 53 by Saturday. So why don't we, because we're not going to be taping until after they make their roster decisions, our next show, why don't we kind of go through the roster and kind of go through position by position and kind of get a sense of where our heads are at this point, right?
Yeah, and I'll bring this up for some folks to take a look at. We can see a current roster, and sorry, let me make sure I share this. Yep.
And then I guess it's towards the end of the show. I don't know if you guys heard Brian's show yesterday, but Brian went on with Mina Kimes and Danny Kelly, two of the best Seahawks voices, and went through a bunch of season predictions. So we're going to touch on some of those later, but right now we're going to go through this roster, and Brian's got it up on the screen for those who can see the show.
Yeah, we can blow through this because we already talked about a bunch of it, right?
Exactly. So let's start with this. Russell's on the team. Russell's looked like an MVP candidate. Who's your backup quarterback right now?
It's Boykin. He's not necessarily my first choice, but that's who I think is a backup.
I think you're probably right, but last week maybe started thinking, because Austin Davis played fantastic. He seems to be much more reliable, but I think they're going to go with the younger developmental guy. But if Austin Davis shows up again like he did in the last game and Boykin can't make a basic pass, maybe that gamer tag was a little much for that. So running back.
Well, I mean, you and I had the same passer rating that Trayvon Boykin did last week.
He could hit anything last game.
And I'll go on record as saying I 100% disagree with Pete Carroll's assessment, and people could say, so what? Who cares what you think? I'm just going to tell you that was not because the line was, out of sorts or that the team was discombobulated.
I thought the line played well this hamstring line.
That was Trayvon Boykin playing horribly and making poor passes and poor decisions. And I know everyone got really excited after his first game of the preseason, and I've been tapping the brakes because I honestly don't see it yet. Even that first preseason game, Casey Williams made 4 great catches that were contested throws. I think they were fine throws. They weren't fantastic, but they could have easily been incomplete or picked off. One of them was in the defender's hands before Casey ripped it out. He threw an interception that game that was way underthrown to Cyril Grayson. I think against starting caliber defenses, I'm not sure Trayvon Boykin is a guy that can really win games for you. Austin Davis has won games in the NFL as a starter, and I think he knows what he's doing. He gets rid of the ball quickly. I think that's a good match for what they're trying to do. I think Pete is too far into in the bag for Trayvon Boykin for it to go any other way. So that's why I think he's the backup.
Quickly off topic for a second. The Lions and Matt Stafford just agreed to a 5-year extension, which is going to make him the highest paid player in NFL history. We're not going to spend too much time or maybe even any time talking about that, but Seahawks fans remember Stafford from the last playoff game. Stafford's never won a playoff game before, and now he's the highest paid player in NFL history, according to Adam Schefter. So that's certainly interesting.
Yeah. You're right. It's news, and I should be more interested, but I'm kind of yawning over here. I don't care much about Matt Stafford.
Yeah, I just thought it was worth bringing up. Okay.
You can tell me to screw off. That's okay.
Show. The lines suck. All right, running back. Let's go.
Yeah. So I haven't updated this yet, but as of right now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I've got Thomas Rawls here at the top. I am going to go out on a limb and say they move him, and that they keep Procise, Lacey, Carson, and Reese.
Wow.
How about you?
In the end, I think Lacey, Procise, Carson are locks. I say they keep Rawls in the end. I think he's an important guy in the locker room, and despite his durability issues, I think the team is very high on him, and they want to see him maybe with a better offensive line. And I think they're gonna have to cut Mike Davis just based on a numbers game, and it's unfortunate because he's looked really good, and I'd like to find a spot for him. And yeah, I'm with you. I go Reese over Madden. Madden looked okay, but Reese is a very versatile fullback that offers a lot more of an option in the passing game and maybe more of a reliable run blocker. Despite the age difference, I go Reese there.
All right, who do you get on receiver? How many? First of all, how many do you think they keep? Because you just said you're keeping 5, so that means what?
I stick with 6 receivers.
Okay, and who are your 6?
Baldwin, Lockett, Richardson, Curse, Williams, McAvoy.
Yep, makes sense. In my world, I've got them going with 7 receivers. And so what that means is I would actually flip this around. I think based on my closest reading of the tea leaves I can do, I probably flip Darbo and McAvoy. That's tough for me to do because I think McAvoy's shown a lot of promise on special teams already and made some plays. He's got a lot of things going for him. I know people think I'm crazy about J.D. McKissick. I've explained why I think that he has unique value that honestly, I mean, Darbo, McAvoy, Casey Williams, none of those guys can be a backup CJ Procise. None of those guys can allow Tyler Lockett to not have to return punts or kicks for a while.
That's a good point.
I just think that's value that is going to make him really hard to keep off the roster. Now, maybe you can sneak him on the practice squad and you still get to have that value, but I don't know. All right, tight ends are easy.
Yeah,
I don't want to talk about this. Offensive linemen, I think this is straightforward, but
I would think so. I like the first 8 guys on your list.
All right.
9. The first 9 guys on your list. I keep 9 here.
So you keep 9. That goes all the way to Tobin. So that's Justin Britt, Ethan Posick, Luke Jokel, Jermaine Ifedi. Let's talk about him in a second. Mark Lewinsky, Ode Abushi, Reese Odiombo, Jordan Roos, and Matt Tobin are the top 9. That means that Will Precheck and Joey Hunt, as well as the new guy they just signed, Tyrus Thompson, do not make the squad.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. I think just a quick note, I thought Jermaine Ifedi played his second straight improved game over the previous game. I'm not not saying he's ready to join Pro Bowl conversation, but if he can be a mediocre pass blocker and a road grading right tackle that he has been, he made some great run blocks again. That's a lot more than I expected. I really thought he would be a disaster at right tackle. Maybe he still will be, but he's showing some promise that I didn't expect to see.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When Tom Cable was speaking last week and he kind of talked about the jump Ifedi took from week 1 to week 2, I kind of rolled my eyes and thought he was nuts. But he said he wanted to see the same jump from week 2 to week 3. And yeah, from all indications, you saw the run blocking. And what interested me especially was it seemed like Russell Wilson and Jermaine Ifedi timed their drops way better in pass pro sets and in drop backs. And they seem to line up with each other so much better than the previous 2 weeks. And that says a lot about kind of how the team has worked with Ifedi and kind of used his skill set to kind of move Russell around. And it really looked a lot cleaner. And with Ifedi, it's all coming down to pass pro because he's a road grading right tackle, exactly what Cable wants out of that spot. A lot like Breno used to be in the Super Bowl years. If he can pass protect, he's going to be a pretty decent right tackle, and I didn't think there was a chance of that happening. I even talked about him starting the year on the bench.
Yeah.
So for what seemed to be a good battle between Ifedi and Postic, that's completely out of the question now. It seems like Postic is going to be that versatile sixth lineman, and Ifedi has won the spot with his play. And as much as I thought that was crazy, he showed it last week.
Yeah, and it's ironic that they just, when they said the left side was solidifying, Fant goes down, and the right side was what they said was up for grabs. And it's very clear to me Odiombo is the right tackle. I think Postic has taken a pretty significant step back. It doesn't mean that he's a bad player, but
yeah,
I don't think he's challenging. And I would say Mark Lewinsky has really grabbed hold of the right guard spot. I think Ibushi is definitely the backup. And Pete said today that Ibushi was going to move over to the left side this game, and Luke Jokel was going to get some, of that, knee process stuff that's been going around the team done just for good measure.
It worked for KJ Wright.
Yeah, he named like 6 guys today that are going to get it. So it must be like people are really enjoying whatever the aftermath of that procedure.
Yeah, and that kind of settled the right guard debate for me. If Glowinski's getting the start this week, for me, it seems like they want him to get all the reps he can get before the season, and it is his natural position. He's going to have to be better in run blocking this year. Targeting at the second level was a real issue for him early in training camp and early in preseason. And blown blocks was a big issue for him last year. But when he played a couple years back in the last week of the season, he looked way more comfortable than he did ever at left guard. So they're going to need to see him just more consistent. He's strong at the point of attack, but he got abused by some good linemen last year. So he's definitely a guy to watch heading into the season.
All right, so let's move on to defensive line.
Yeah, this is where we get real interesting here.
Yeah, so, let's Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill, Frank Clark, Jaron Reed, Nazir Jones, Ataba Rubin, Cassius Marsh. I think we can all agree they're on the team.
Yeah, Marsh has looked fantastic too.
He has. And so that's 7 players. Typically the team is caught. So go back to the roster summary for people that haven't seen this before. Last year they kept 8 players. Their average since 8 defensive linemen. Average since 2010 is 8.5. I currently I have them keeping 9. Do you agree that they'll keep an extra?
Yeah, I think you have to. I think David Bass should be on the team, no doubt. He should be a lock at this point. I don't know how he's looked in practice, but in the games, he's flashed all over, playing different spots on the line. And given some of the interior issues, he's been able to be functional there. Marcus Smith really got high praise from Pete today, so they seem to like him a lot. I haven't seen huge flashes from him, but he's definitely looked better than he did in Philadelphia. And Quinton Jefferson's looked pretty stout. So this is a really hard one for me.
So you got 9. You get 2 out of these 3. Who are your 2?
I'm going to go Bass and Jefferson.
Yeah, I think there's a coin flip. So yeah. I will tell you, David Bass is the guy that I would be most disappointed if he didn't make the team. The guy's done everything to earn a spot. He's been good on special teams. He's been good outside rushing. He's been good inside rushing. His energy's been just consistent. If he doesn't make the team, then forget the Amara Darbo conversation about competition.
Yeah, this would be the worst one. Yeah,
that would be a real slap in the face because Bass has earned it. He really, really has. But, Marcus Smith is a guy that I mentioned really first day that pads came on, he jumped out to me. And in the scrimmage, he showed pass rush. He's shown pass rush when he's played in the preseason. He's got a great body for it. I think the team has an idea how they want to use him. So I currently have him on the squad, but Quinton Jefferson, I mentioned in my notes from the Chiefs game, second straight game in his limited snaps, he made an impact. He looked good, and he got some snaps with the starting unit in the first half. And this is a guy that can play inside and outside and has some pass rush potential. And look, here's the thing that we didn't mention, but they brought in Desmond Bryant who was waived by the Browns at defensive tackle for a tryout. And you look at he missed last year with a torn pec. But this is a guy who's consistently gotten at least 3 sacks, as many as 6 in a season from that interior position, and has been at sometimes a pretty dominant defensive lineman. You know, he may steal that spot. It may be a David Bass and a Desmond Bryant, or, you know, but I think Quentin Jefferson's really interesting, and I don't envy the team having to make that call. Do they keep 10 guys and go to, you know, I don't know. Do you go to 4 safeties or 6?
5 linebackers?
Gosh, I can't imagine them doing that, because Dewey McDonald is their second leading special teams tackler last year. He's a backup at all 3 positions. He's had a great preseason. These are the really tough decisions that you know, a general manager has to make.
Yeah, Jefferson might be this year's Jay Howard. You mentioned that. Similar skill set.
Yeah.
If they're already looking at other guys, it makes you wonder, because Marcus Smith does at a unique spot off the edge that they might want to limit Cliff Avrill's snaps over time, and having an extra edge rusher really would help them. They're a speed guy at a Leo spot.
Yep. I think the thing that makes it hardest for David Bass is that I think that the Seahawks have a harder time finding the interior guys, and he's played interior, so he can show it, but as a real defensive tackle, I think that's tough for him, and they may want to have a little bit more beef. You know, they've got Reed, they've got Jones, and they got Rubin. You know, Jefferson's the only other guy that is a real defensive tackle by nature. And so that gives him a little bit of an advantage, and Smith and Bass really aren't. So, you know, I could easily talk myself into a Quentin Jefferson or a Desmond Bryant or maybe a Sheldon Richardson, you know, being on there and causing a lot of shuffling.
Yeah, I don't envy John Schneider there. That's the hardest decision, maybe even harder than receiver, that they have to make on this team.
So linebacker, you've got Wagner, you've got KJ Wright. I assume you're with me on Terrence Garvin and Michael Wilhoit, you know, making the squad. DJ Alexander, you know, this is a guy they traded Kevin Pierre-Louis for, who was a Pro Bowl special teamer last year. I don't see any. I mean, I could probably put him as a lock from my perspective.
Yeah, I think so too.
And then it's a really question of, is Dewey McDonald, you know, do they keep 6? And I just gave you the reason why I think they do. What's your thought?
Yeah, I think I don't see a reason to keep Mike Morgan. He's probably the oldest guy in the bunch other than Will Hoyt, and doesn't have any club control. They've been signing him to these 1-year deals. So I think they move on from him, as much as he's been a good guy around the program, and he's lifted up the 12th man flag, and it's been around for years. But I think the other guys offer more special teams upside. And the one guy who's really flashed to me was Palacio, number 49. I kept running his number down. I don't think he makes the team, and I think he's a perfect practice squad guy, but he's really flashed. Every time I watch the second and third string defense, he keeps making plays, but I just don't think there's room for him on this crazy deep roster. But he's got to watch in the developmental stage.
I think you're spot on. Definitely saw Cash show up in that game, especially. I think I loved him last year. I wrote about him in my camp notes, and he's a high speed, high impact kind of player, and good on special teams. I think he's a playmaker. The numbers just don't work for him. You know, I don't see how he can jump up there. And I think Dewey McDonald is, you know, not what people don't know about Dewey McDonald is he's a safety as well. He's played safety in the league. He can play all 3 linebacker spots. And like I said, he's second in the team in special teams tackles last year. So I just think he's got a rare mix that's going to make him tough to knock off. And as we move on to the cornerbacks and safeties, I think we should do these together.
Last big decision.
Yeah. So, you know, right now I've got the team keeping 5 cornerbacks and 5 safeties. I told you I've been vacillating back and forth, and you know, historically, they're 5.5 corners and 4.9 safeties. This is since Pete Carroll and John Schneider came around. So right around 5 and 5 last year, they kept 5 cornerbacks and 6 safeties, which was insane. And they quickly changed that and changed the roster around. So I got them at 5 and 5. And for me, I think it's pretty straightforward on cornerback. If they keep 5, it's Sherman, Griffin, Brock, Jeremy Lane, and Nico Thorpe, who was their leading special teams tackler last year.
Agreed.
And And then on safety, if they keep 5, I think it's also pretty straightforward. It's Thomas Chancellor, Bradley McDougall, Delano Hill, and Tedrick Thompson.
So it's Thompson versus Elliott for that last spot, unless Desir is in the
I
trunk.
think so. I think it's Desir, Elliott, and Thompson would be the guys you're really trying to decide. One of those 3.
I think I like Elliott the most, but I see the team going towards Thompson as a developmental guy. I don't know. Maybe they want to justify the draft pick. Maybe they want a long-term backup for Earl Thomas because McDougall's only on a 1-year deal. But my gut says Thompson. If it's up to me, I think I'm taking one of the corners. And I think Desir might be the guy I take over Elliott. I think he's shown more, and I was high on Desir coming into camp. I remember I mentioned him on our first show, and it's up to me. I take one of the corners, but if I have to predict what they're doing, I take Tedrick Thompson. How about you?
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I've had Tedrick on the squad, off the squad, mostly off the squad. I don't know that he's done enough to earn a spot, but he hasn't had the blunders that he had initially. And I'm high on DeAndre Elliott. I think he's NFL caliber at that cornerback spot, and I think he's going to grow into something. He's not going to be Ron Parker, but
No.
I think he's going to be a promising guy, and I think Desir is as well. I think this is a year where the Seahawks could let go 2 corners, that end up really catching on somewhere else. So, it's. I feel
That's
like
not
I
easy,
know this roster.
Get John Schneider on the phone and help us.
What's that?
Let's get Schneider on the phone and go through this with us. This is.
Oh my
I don't know
God.
how he's going to do this on Saturday. That's a rough one.
In the 30 minutes, he probably is sleeping a night at this point. This is the time where he is. Look, we all get we get so familiar with these names, even the back end of the roster guys who all these obsessed Seahawks fans like you and me really focus on. But for the last few years, what's always happened is there's been trades at the end of this period, and they move guys around. They grab, Nico Thorpe has been a guy. Dewey McDonald's been a guy that they traded for at the end for draft picks or for whatever else.
Kelsey McRae
could go the other way this time. You could see a few players that get sent out for a 6th-round pick. If they can get a 5th-round pick, John Schneider wants his 5th-round pick back that they gave up to Matt Tobin. I think the only guy that has potentially 5th-round or higher value would be someone like Thomas Rawls or maybe Paul Richardson, but Paul Richardson's on the last year of his deal, so I don't know that I see that.
No, club control is important.
Yeah, it's. I'm looking across the roster again. I just don't see anyone else. Tedrick Thompson, maybe, but I
Someone
don't
would have really had to like his college tape.
Right. So I think we could see some of that flipping around. And if they sign a guy like Desmond Bryant is probably a better way to refer to him. In this
got the best mugshot of all time, by the way.
Then. Yeah, I think that he would be nicely round out the roster. And then you got guys like Quentin Jefferson. He could be a guy that you could stash on the practice squad. There's not necessarily a lot of tape on him.
That's true.
And I don't think Marcus Smith necessarily is. The Seahawks claimed him. I think other teams would. He was a former 1st-round pick. He's a little harder to hide than
teams know him.
So – yeah, this is going to be an interesting next couple days for sure.
Okay, so one thing I also want to say, Blair Walsh has totally grown on me. I was super skeptical coming into camp. First a couple shows, I was freaking out at all those reports that he was missing kicks. I don't know if it was a point at Mike Zimmer or just his accuracy every game. I drafted him in my fantasy league in the last round.
Nice.
And he's totally, I don't know, maybe I'm buying into the preseason hype. I know I said that I have an addiction with that. But he's totally grown on me. Stephen Hauschka is a guy I really felt comfortable with over the years. But, yeah, that Walsh move, if they got him up for nothing compared to what Hauschka got, that really looks like a smart move in hindsight, considering all the stress about him.
It does. And my biggest concern about Walsh was never his ability as a kicker, but it was where his head was at. And, is this a guy that's got the yips and just is never going to be able to get it back? And that's part of what I just loved about how he handled the Vikings situation.
Yeah.
It showed like he was past that. He's like, screw you guys. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I don't need your crap. And let me show you. Let me show you I'm back. And I think that's so perfect for this team. I mean, it's exactly the right mentality, the way this team approaches things. And I'm super cheering for him. I've actually been trying to find some time to talk to him and see if I can get him either on this show or, one-on-one for an interview, because he's exactly the kind of guy I love to follow and build more of a relationship with and cheer for over time. And I think that I've been needing some help on a nickname. I've been calling him Walshy, and I kind of like that for whatever silly reason. But Mina Kimes hit it yesterday with the Blair Walsh Project. I think that's it's a pretty good one, although I don't like the horror.
I don't want any kicker named Project. It's kind of scary.
That's right.
Okay, so yeah, we mentioned the show earlier. You did the show with Mina Kelly from ESPN and Danny Kelly of The Ringer. Mina Kimes of EMS. Oh, sorry. Mina Kimes and Danny Kelly.
New news?
They got married pretty quickly there.
I'm going to let them know.
I just married the two Seahawks fans to make the ultimate Seahawk baby. So you got into a bunch of predictions with them. I watched the whole show while I was watching some of the preseason games yesterday. Is there any you'd like to maybe repeat on, or maybe ask some of the fans, or you can ask me, or you can touch on? There was a lot of good stuff in there.
Well, I think, I'll maybe bring up one, and then, we'll see about talking about some more of this next week or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
We're 90 minutes in as it is. So,
okay.
One of the ones that I was interested in,
so
Danny was super high on Chris Carson, and I think he had him starting like 10 games this year, which is interesting, and it doesn't show up on the predictions. But let's see. So a couple here. The red zone targets, the top 3 rank in red zone targets, and as most Seahawks fans know, number 1 last year was Doug Baldwin. Number 2 was Jermaine Kearse, to most people's dismay, and number 3 was Jimmy Graham. We had 3 different predictions here. I had Baldwin, Graham, and Kearse. Graham being number 2. I still had Kearse as number 3. Mina had Baldwin, Graham, and Richardson. Paul Richardson is 3rd. And Danny had Baldwin, Graham, and Lockett, number 3. Curious if any of those ring a bell for you.
Okay, we'll just go with this one prediction. We've been on since 6:30, so we'll stick with this one prediction. I'm going to go a little crazy here. I'm going to go Graham number 1, Baldwin number 2, and CJ Procise number 3, assuming you can
that came up. That's a good one.
Okay, I'm going with Graham over Baldwin. As much as I like Baldwin, they're probably their most targeted player. They've really made a concerted effort to target Jimmy Graham down there, and you can see it in the preseason games. Jimmy Graham last year didn't have any offseason. This year he's been working closely with Russell, and they've really emphasized that in their scheme. And you've seen it in preseason. They've tried those deep balls to the corner. They're not necessarily working yet. Russell still hasn't mastered that throw. And I was saying this today, I'd like to see him do that play he used to run a ton in New Orleans, where they isolate him to the left side, run a slant where he can use his arm and catch radius. I think that's a play they have not utilized enough. So I'm going to go him 1. Baldwin probably will end up 1. But I'm just hoping they figure out this Graham thing, because it's been driving me nuts. And number 3, it could have been anyone. I'm just hoping that they come to their senses and keep Kearse off the field in the red zone. And I'm probably will be totally wrong on that, because he's actually looked okay in the preseason, other than that one red zone toss. And I'm hoping for CJ Procise. That's probably a shot in the dark, but he could be such a dangerous red zone weapon, as a similar role to like a Danny Woodhead, who has a ton of receiving touchdowns, and just the way you can isolate him out, use him as a receiver, which he played in Notre Dame for the first couple of years of his college career. And I think if he can be on the field, and even maybe you keep him in a limited role, given Carson and Rawls and whoever they use at running back, he should be a dynamic red zone player. And I'd like to see him dial up plays because he's a perfect player to use down there.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And his name did come up yesterday, and it'd be interesting how they use him. I will take it as a good sign that Jimmy Graham got 2 targets in the red zone in this game. I made note
to hit them.
Only one was in the end zone, but one was at about the 7-yard line, and I think both were incomplete, which is too bad. But we'll talk about that next week, I think, as
Mhm.
we get into the season preview. We got a bunch of stuff coming on the blog at hawkblogger.com. We're going to talk about, where they need to be with the red zone and where they need to be on third downs. Those are going to be key aspects of how this team evolves because, look, Russell Wilson has had a preseason that is really his best since he's been in the NFL.
Yeah.
You've got an offense that is doing things that they've never done before, across the Pete Carroll timeframe. You got a defense that's been looking really solid. We got a lot coming to break that down. All the guys are going to be contributing to that, so you'll see that come up this weekend. And then next week we're into the game prep, dude. Like this is Green Bay Packers week 1. There's gonna be a ton to break down. We'll get into the matchups and what's really going to coming to be real. And I think the Seahawks have a lot of matchups that are going to give people problems.
Yeah, enough preseason talk for me. I'm ready for the real thing now. 4th week of the preseason is kind of a wash to me. Not for the backup guys. I'm ready to start this thing. And yeah, next week we're breaking down the regular season in week 1 at Green Bay, probably the game of the week in the NFL. So I'm super pumped for that. And yeah, we'll keep rolling with these shows every week. And as we got a great guest tonight, and we're going to keep rolling with those. So everyone keep following the site, keep following the Real Hawk Talk show, and we'll be back next week. So always a pleasure, Brian.
Yeah, for folks following, please click subscribe. We're trying to grow our base here, and you'll get notifications whenever we got a new show coming. As you know, sometimes these things jump around. We're going to try to keep it at a consistent time, but when we get a great guest like Mike Garafolo, we're going to work on his schedule and make sure that's there.
Yeah.
We will post here and let people know so they can set reminders as early as possible when these things are going to be on. And for people that are insiders for Hawk Blogger, we'll try to give you even more notice where we can. I know some of you love joining these things and want to set your clocks around them as well. So if you go to patreon.com, patreon.com/hawkblogger, you can sign up, be a Hawk Blogger insider. Guess what? We've, as part of what's been going on with Patreon and Hawk Blogger insiders, we've got access to Pro Football Focus full stat database. And I've been able to start providing some of the Pro Football Focus grades to those insiders. So that's a great way for, all this money, is going to help improve the coverage we can give you here, as well as to Ben's Fund, a charity that helps kids that helps parents that can't afford expensive autism treatments. So, we've given over $60,000 to Ben's Fund. I'm hoping they'll have a record year, and you guys joining on at patreon.com/hawkblogger is a great way to do it. So thank you. And kudos to Jeff on a huge get today with Mike Garafolo. We got more great guests coming. So take care, everybody. Good night and go Hawks.
Yeah, let's kick the Packers' ass.